Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Bryce Duskett and thank you for joining us today on Market Journal. We have a lot to cover in this week's episode, including a look at how Nebraska beef is being served up in Las Vegas. Details on that story are coming up here in a moment. But first, at the top of the headlines this week, with news of India banning wheat exports last week and the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, wheat futures have been on the rise over global supply concerns and the quality of U.S. wheat crop changing little from week to week. On top of all of that, with recent freeze events this past weekend across much of Nebraska's panhandle, wheat producers are sure to see an increase in crop injury and a decrease in yields. Historically, as much as 50% of Nebraska's wheat crop is exported each year, with factors likely to come into play one after another. Nebraska's wheat exports will be critical among rising global demand. In order to help bolster wheat producers here in the Cornhusker State, the University of Nebraska Lincoln's Crop Performance Testing Program will be sponsoring wheat variety trial field tours in 8 locations across Nebraska, all the way from Jefferson County to Banner County, beginning Thursday, June 9th through June 23rd. These tours will give producers a chance to contrast and compare different wheat varieties that would be best suited for their operations and to answer any questions that they may have.
Well, I would say first and foremost, it allows the producers to see all these wheat varieties side by side, and so they can look for different characteristics that they might be interested in, whether that's disease resistance or growth type, baking and milling quality are things that are discussed at these field sites. It also provides the producers an opportunity to interact with industry representatives, whether that's from different seed companies, public breeders or agronomists or plant pathologists, also with the seed dealers and farmers alike. You know, there's just a lot of opportunities to interact with other participants at these sites and get your questions answered.
If you find yourself unable to attend any of these events on their planned dates, there will be other options available for producers to view the fields and variety trial results.
Yeah, so first and foremost, I would say if you can't attend when the actual event is held, folks are welcome to stop by the plots at any time, about a week before, and all the way up to harvest. These plots are going to be labeled out in the field, and so folks can stop by and see these plots at their leisure. The second opportunity would be just to track down the results around harvest time. We try to post those as quickly as possible. They're available on CropWatch or at varietytesting.unl.edu. We post them all there for folks to see, and so those are kind of the two main options that folks have.
If any of those alternative options still won't work for your schedule, you still have the option of looking up and logging on to UNL's Wheat Variety app at your convenience.
Well, we've discussed it once before, but we do have a variety testing app for wheat, for winter wheat specifically, and you can find that, again, through varietytesting.unl.edu. And it's an interactive app where we upload all of the data for our winter wheat trials, and it allows growers to go through and select, their region, their traits of interest, and look at performance of wheat varieties for a number of different traits. The other highlight, again, I mentioned that we do have some spring wheat interest growing in Nebraska, is we are also conducting spring wheat variety trials. So actually, the field tours at McCook and at Sydney will highlight both the winter wheat variety trials and the spring wheat variety trials. So if there are growers interested in spring wheat, again, they can always reach out to us with questions, but also be on the lookout for the results of those trials.
If you would like to attend any of these field tours, we will be kicking off in Jefferson County on June 9th, Red Willow County on June 15th, Gosper County on June 20th. There will be 2 events on June 21st. The first at 10 a.m. in Perkins County. Registration is required for that one particular event. The second will be at 4 p.m. in Dual County. 2 other events will follow June 22nd in Cheyenne and Box Butte counties as well, with the final event taking place June 23rd, that one in Banner County. If you'd like more information on the times, dates, and details of these tours, and you'd like to learn more, you can visit cropwatch.unl.edu. We've also taken the liberty of posting that information along with this story on the Market Journal website. As we turn our attention over to the grain markets, we were joined on Wednesday by Jeff Peterson. He is the president of Heartland Farm Partners. At the time of the recording, the markets were absorbing a host of headlines that could impact the trade. In Ukraine, a senior Russian official said that Moscow could allow a grain corridor out of Ukraine in exchange for easing of sanctions. We discussed that topic with Jeff, but began with news out of Brazil. China's Customs Authority recently finalized an agreement to allow imports of Brazilian corn. Jeff shares his thoughts on how that news could impact the U.S. corn market.
You know, it's really interesting to kind of think about that. They didn't have that ability to go to Brazil before. But yeah, that just came out. And if you think about it, big picture, what that means is that now all of a sudden you've got the world's largest buyer in China. It wasn't always that way, but that's what it turns out to be now. Now they have, instead of, really hitting the U.S. and also now they've got the ability to come in and hit Brazil also. I think the headline impact of it probably has a bigger impact than overall. Because if we just sit back and think about it, ultimately Brazil was selling all their bushels before. And so what it's going to be is that if they sell some additional bushels and those go to China, then what's going to happen is their price will come up, and then the U.S. will be selling to some of those individuals that were buying from Brazil. So in the big scheme of things, it really doesn't impact the supply and demand numbers. It doesn't impact our stocks to use. It does just redirect some of the trade.
Mm-hmm. Redirecting some of that because Ukraine, of course, used to be a big producer and exporter of corn. That's not the case right now. We do have some news on that front, though, Jeff. It's kind of interesting. We see that Russia is offering now to make a grain corridor of sorts. Share with us what you've heard on this front.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. And as you dig into it, it seemed like before Russia had kind of downplayed and said, no, they weren't willing to do that. But now here recently, some stories that came out where they have said now, yeah, we're willing to do that. And that's kind of the headline. The challenging part comes in the rest of the story, Bryce. And the rest of it is they'll do that, but there's certain conditions. And some of those conditions are basically removing the sanctions that are in place. And, I think the chance of that happening, the removing of the sanctions, I think is extremely low. I don't think we'll see that. As a result, they also haven't unclosed all their details in regard to, now, which ports are we talking about? Are we talking about Odessa? Or are we really just talking about Mariupol, which basically Russia has control of already? And ultimately, it sounds like they have opened that up to send some shipments out of there, but that isn't going to be anything that Ukraine's going to want to send any bushels into an area that's controlled and occupied by Russia. So there's a lot of confusion about that. I do think that headline of itself, that Russia was willing to set up a grain corridor, I do think that put some pressure on the markets. But I think as everybody kind of thinks about it and reads into it, I think we'll ultimately walk away from that and say, well, I don't think that's going to happen.
Another question to be asked there is who would be willing to float a ship into a place like that?
Well, and you've laid that out. That's the biggest thing you run into, is that the insuring of those ships. So you have to have the ability, the owner of a ship willing to take it in there, but you also have to have the insurance company that's willing to insure it. So you're exactly right, Bryce.
Well, to begin the week, Jeff, back here in the U.S., we got the latest round of USDA data when it comes to planting progress. What stuck out there for you?
It was good to see a good week of planting progress. We're now sitting at 72% planted on the corn, 50% on the beans, so that was a nice advancement. But now we're getting to that time of the year where we start thinking about, we're catching up to the average is a common thing we hear. Well, we will catch up to the average eventually. However, this crop overall has probably been planted 7 to, in many cases, 14 days later than what we'd have liked to have seen, and in compared to the past. But you're also going forward going to see a lot of talk about who is planted and who isn't planted. And when we start talking about who isn't planted, we have to start talking about the northern plains. In particular, we have to talk about North Dakota and also Minnesota and parts of South Dakota. And we don't talk about this a lot, but then you have to slide over into Canada. And Canada, they're just as wet as what North Dakota is, especially in that Manitoba province.
We had a viewer question I want to get to on this topic. Jim from northeast Nebraska wrote in and said, are there any guesses on the number of prevented planted acres? Any idea from you?
Yeah, that's getting a lot of talk. And that's the reason it's getting so much talk is that actually May 25th is the the final planting date. Now they have a late planting date. They can go another 25 days after that. But what happens up in North Dakota and South Dakota and Minnesota is that once you get past May 25th, your insurance coverage is going to drop 1% per day, and that'll run for up to 25 days. So you've still got time to plant. It's just at a reduced level of coverage. Well, since that's happening, what you'll have is the prevent plant. We have prevent plant about every year. As a matter of fact, the average, if we don't include 2019, because in 2019, across corn, beans, and wheat, we had almost 19, a little over 19 million acres. That was a big number. But if you don't include that number in the average, our average prevent plant is about 3.8 million acres. Now, we haven't had a chance to see, and NASS doesn't disclose in their planting intentions report what they're figuring for prevent plant, but our research would suggest that we're probably coming in somewhere around about 2 million acres. As we've done the analysis state by state, we really are moved our number up, because that's a similar area to where we started earlier in the year. We've actually moved our prevent plant number up to about 4.3 million acres, and that's really because of the wetness that they're seeing up in North Dakota. Now, the current weather front that's coming across that is going to dump some more rain across that area and region. It's also got some cooler temps up there. So when we come around till Tuesday and get the update then, they normally come out on Monday, we get an update on Tuesday, I think we're going to have a lot more people talking about how many acres of prevent plant could come out of the northern plains.
Mm-hmm. Back on the topic of planting progress, you referenced planting date. I'm wondering, you're a data guy, you enjoy tracking the data. Any idea what later planting date would have historically when it comes to the U.S. yield for corn and soybeans?
Well, the further we go, the later we get, we'll ultimately see that we're going to take some of the top end off the crop. Now, everybody wants to start and say, oh, let's start at trend line, which this year would be 181, and take the yield off from that. But ultimately, there isn't a lot of good correlation from that, because we went in and studied that pretty extensively to say, hey, if we plant it 7 days later or 10 days later, it always means this lesser amount of yield. Now, I think there is a yield impact, but the summer weather and the later weather is going to be so much more important into what our final yield is going to be.
Well, let's wrap up today's conversation with this question. What's maybe a piece of news or a topic out there that's not getting enough press or enough discussion in the markets right now, Jeff?
Well, I think one of them that we really have to talk about is that what's weather. Okay, so let's start first here in the U.S. Once we get this crop planted, what's going to be some of our summer weather conditions? Because we have to have a really good crop here in the U.S., but also along the lines of weather, we have to still keep in mind South America is still having some issues with that safrinha corn crop. You know, it looks like, and we're anticipating in this next report that would come out, you know, in the June crop report, we think we'll see them lower that safrinha yield, but that's another area that I think we need to watch, Bryce.
We always appreciate Jeff stopping by to share his thoughts with us. Coming up next week, we'll be joined by Luke Beckman of Central Valley Ag. If you have a comment or a question for one of our grain analysts, you can always email us or get in touch with us on social media. Before the pandemic, more than 42 million people would flock to the city of Las Vegas each year. Tourism, obviously the bread and butter for the area, generating nearly $60 billion annually. Those visitors are often anxious for a great dining experience, and that's where Nebraska steps in. Late last week, Nebraska Governor Pete Ricketts and other state ag leaders visited the entertainment capital of the world to learn how Nebraska beef is being served up. The beef promotion tour kicked off at the Wynn Resort and Casino. Attendees of the trip received a behind-the-scenes glimpse of the massive resort, which includes 4,700 rooms and suites, 32 restaurants, and much more.
We're here in Las Vegas talking with places like the Wynn to say, hey, world-class restaurants deserve world-class beef. And so it's an opportunity for us to be able to bring in producers from Nebraska, talk to the folks here about how we raise our beef in Nebraska, why it's the best in the world, and just work with some of the folks who are involved in the industry here so that we can give them some of the tools to be able to talk to their customers about why they should buy Nebraska beef.
The Wynn Resort serves up tons of beef, 460 tons of beef each year to be exact. After that tour, some of the chefs had the opportunity to meet with Nebraska beef producers to learn where that steak began. Nebraska Department of Agriculture Director Steve Wellman said the discussion helps build spokespeople for Nebraska beef.
Who better than the people in the kitchen, the chefs, and then their team and the weight team that interface with the customers all the time. And I think we've invited them, the chefs, to Nebraska if they want to come back, visit us in person and visit our ranches. We'll surely do that with these folks and help. We talked about how they meet daily or quite often with their wait staff and talk about the products that they're putting on the plates. And we're going to make that connection back to Nebraska on those beef items.
Those beef items from Nebraska often get their start inside the walls of Greater Omaha Packing Company. Representatives from the company, including President Mike Drury, joined the governor on this promotion trip.
Greater Omaha Packing is a third generation, independently owned packing house right in the heart of Omaha, Nebraska. And we buy the best Angus, Hereford cattle in the state of Nebraska, and been processing those cattle, and we export product to over 70 countries and through all the states, all throughout the United States.
From Omaha Packing Company to regional meat distributors such as Newport Meat of Nevada. On the second day of the tour, the group visited that business, which is a division of Sysco. Newport Meat will often order beef and further process it into specific cuts for high-end restaurants and resorts. Jocelyn Mango is the sales manager for the company. She says it is important to continue the passion that was put into raising that animal.
We basically continue the story and the passion of what that happens in the ags and in the middle of America. We want to continue those standards that they took to make sure that that quality came to us to be able to produce those steaks for those chefs. Basically, it's important that we kind of push that passion in what we do, because that chef is going to be that last person that puts it on that plate. So we really want to make sure that what your guys' work that's getting done in Nebraska is actually going to be shown and highlighted perfectly here in Las Vegas or any of those other cities that our product goes to.
The beef producers who were on that tour agreed the trip was a worthy investment of time to make connections and share the story of Nebraska beef.
I'm one bookend of the beef industry, and this is the other bookend. And it is so important for all of the segments, all the books in between, to come together and understand the whole process throughout this very segmented industry.
People are demanding the quality product that comes out of Nebraska, and that I think we've all learned through this is that Nebraska is best positioned for high quality beef. From the conception of the live calf in a cow-calf operation, all the way through the feedlots to the beef packers such as Greater Omaha, Nebraska's best positioned than anywhere in the country for the beef industry.
The idea of a domestic beef promotion tour spurred out of restrictions on international travel due to the coronavirus pandemic. Governor Ricketts said he was pleased by the interactions the group had while in Las Vegas.
By bringing in our producers that can talk directly about what they do, it really helps the folks here in Las Vegas understand where that beef comes from so they can tell their customers. So that's probably the most valuable part of this trip.
My thanks goes to that group for allowing me to tag along with those tours. If you would like to learn more about the domestic beef promotion tour, you can visit the Market Journal website and click on a link to that story. Crude oil is certainly on the minds of many Nebraskans as fuel prices continue to rise. Nebraska is known for producing crops, cattle, and surprising to many, crude oil as well. For more than 80 years, oil wells on farms and ranches in 19 counties, mostly closer to the Panhandle and southwestern portion of the state, along with Richardson County and the southeast, have produced several million barrels of crude oil each year. While 2020 was the lowest production year since 1950 in Nebraska, new oil wells continue to be discovered and come online in the state. You can get all the details in the most recent issue of the Nebraska Farmer. Well, it is now time for weather with Nebraska Extension ag climatologist and Market Journal's chief meteorologist, Al Dutcher. Well, Al, we had cooler temperatures earlier in the week with temperatures rising in the later part of it. And we mixed in a little precipitation as well. How are things shaping up as we turn to the week ahead?
Well, Bryce, we've seen a string of weather this week. We've seen the freezing temperatures last weekend, and we've seen low temperatures, at least in the Panhandle, from many of our mesonet stations that were in the 20 to 25 degree range. The western one-third of the state, most locations were below the freezing mark. We did see scattered freezing temperatures across portions of central and eastern Nebraska, but not nearly as stronger temperatures on the low side as we've seen in western Nebraska. Of course, seen some brief warm up in the early part of the week, and then we had that low pressure system to come out of the southern plains and took a much farther westward drift in its path than was forecasted last week, and we ended up with a lot of locations in east central, southeast, and portions of south central Nebraska that were in the 2 to 3 inch range for total storm accumulation, with lesser totals as you moved off toward the west and the northwest. Now we are in the holiday weekend, and we are expecting to see some fairly good conditions across the state with chances for scattered thunderstorm activity, and probably the most potential for severe, widespread severe weather will come as we get into the Monday night into the Tuesday time frame. So let's take a look at the upper air models and see what we have in store. First thing I'll draw your attention to is there's that trough in the western United States. Means flow will be out of the southwest in the upper atmosphere, more southerly to southwesterly at the surface. That's going to bring our temperatures well up into the 80s, and we might even see a few scattered 90s, particularly southwest and south central Nebraska. The main precipitation bands ejecting out of this trough will be moving toward the western Dakotas. By the time we get into tomorrow, this trough really starts to deepen significantly. We see another piece of energy rotating around this, so a surface low will start to form in west central portions of Kansas. That will move toward the northeast. It's going to take that Gulf moisture and lift it up into the northern Rockies, portions of the central Rockies, and also into the Dakotas. And as we get into Monday, now that trough starts to slip a little bit farther toward the east. Another of these low pressure system develops at the surface in northwestern Kansas. This one looks like it's going to bring the potential for some scattered shower and thunderstorm activity to the panhandle in north central Nebraska. And that will congeal as we get into Tuesday afternoon and Tuesday morning in central and eastern Nebraska, which may lead to some fairly widespread convective outbreak. In fact, the Storm Prediction Center is indicating this is a potential area for development. We'll see very heavy precipitation up in the northern Rockies and the western Dakotas. And then as we get into Wednesday, this trough starts to open up and move toward the Great Lakes. That will leave high pressure building into the south or to the southeast. And as that builds into the southeast, we'll have a zone where the precipitation will congeal here over eastern Nebraska. The potential is for another couple inches of moisture in the worst case scenarios. And then by Thursday, the system moves off toward the east, brings cooler temperatures into our region. We'll be looking at highs going from the 80s and 90s this weekend into the 70s and maybe even the low 80s as we get late into next week as that thunderstorm activity pushes off to the southern plains. And then on day Friday, we start to turn our attention to another trough developing in the southern stream. This is expected to start moving out into our region as we get into next weekend. So low pressure develops in the Texas Panhandle. May start to see some scattered precipitation in this area, and then this will spread as we go into next weekend with the potential for some more severe weather activity here in Nebraska. 8 to 14 day forecast keeps the cool conditions in place. Doesn't look like that's going to break down anytime soon. And in terms of precipitation, that storm will start to eject out, and we'll probably see normal to above normal moisture as we go through the later half of next week.
Thanks as always, Al. Finally today, ag producers in several parts of the state have been dealing with an influx of wildfires in recent months. While these fires have been impacting large swaths of agricultural land, it still remains imperative for homeowners, especially those in rural areas, to make sure they're taking steps to help prevent the spread of wildfires. Market Journal producer Brad Mills recently spoke with the Nebraska Forest Service to get some tips on how you can help prevent the spread of wildfires while also protecting your home.
So I'm sure for anybody who's been watching the news, the biggest thing has been the Road 702 fire, which happened, roughly 2 weeks ago. Before that, we had the Road 739 fire. The Road 702 burnt about 45,000 acres. That was in Furnace County and Red Willow County. Before that, the 739 fire was in Furnace County as well and in Gosper County. So it's been a very active fire season so far. What's funny is typically we'd be having this conversation in June all the way up until September because that's a typical wildfire season. But our crews have been going hard since November. You know, the dry summer last year, the record low snowfall this time around during the winter, and of course the high winds that have been happening have led to numerous red flag warnings around the state, and then of course these fires. We have to worry about areas like typically in suburban parts of the town, areas that have like larger lots, for example, where we have more vegetation. That's not so much an issue in our inner cities like downtown Omaha, downtown Lincoln. So for homeowners who live in more rural parts of the state or have larger lots with vegetation on their properties, we want them to kind of take into consideration what they're planting. So in Nebraska, we subscribe to Firewise, which is a model that helps us determine basically a good strategy for what we're going to be planting, around our homes. We have 3 different zones that create what we call defensible spaces. We start with what's called the immediate zone. That's within 5 feet of a structure. Within those 5 feet, we want to avoid things like planting juniper, something that's highly flammable. We want to keep our grass mowed, keep it very short around the base of our homes, sheds, decks, you name it. We also want to focus on planting things like perennials as opposed to wildflowers. From there, we move into what we call our intermediate zone. That's 5 to 30 feet away from a structure. The big focus there is pruning. We want to look around and see if we have, trees like limbs hanging over our rooftop. That's essential. We want to prevent the spread of wildfire. If we have an active fire situation, those limbs are coming down, it's obviously a problem. In terms of planting, we'll focus more on, oak, honey locust, elm, still staying away from juniper, spruce, any of the highly flammable sort of plants. From there, we move to what's called the extended zone. That's 30 to 100 feet away from a structure. And that's where we're really going to focus not so much on what's around the house, we'll be looking at what's in our yards. What kind of litter is there? Do we have downed tree limbs? Are there branches, pine cones, seeds? These things are all flammable and they can cause a problem. We're not thinking so much about what's going to start a fire. We want to stop the spread of the fire in that area. And this is also the point where we can start looking at juniper, spruce, concolor fir, that we can actually plant those items.
Thanks to Brad for that story. As the old saying goes, you can't fool Mother Nature. However, we do hope that these tips can provide some assistance to homeowners in mitigating the spread of fires and help protect their homes. That is going to do it for this week's edition of Market Journal. Be sure you're following us online. You can do so on the YouTube channel as well as on social media to join in on the conversation. Hope to see you back here next time. Until then, I'm Bryce Duskett. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.